My project is on the movie Wild Indian. Summary. Wild Indian, released in 2021, is a psychological thriller and drama that explores the complex lives of two Native American men, Makwa and Teto. The film is set in both the 1980s and present day, moving between the characters' past and their current lives. The story begins when Makwa, a young Native American boy, commits a violent crime by killing a classmate. His cousin, Teto, helps him cover it up. As they grow older, both struggle with the weight of their actions and the trauma of their past. Makwa becomes a successful but troubled man, hiding his past and living in a life full of guilt and anger. Teto, on the other hand, spirals into a life of violence and substance abuse. The plot focuses on their troubled past and the consequences of their choices. As their lives intersect once again in adulthood, the film examines themes of identity, guilt, revenge, and the lasting effects of violence as the characters confront their shared history. Wild Indian is notable for its exploration of complexities of Native American life, the emotional scars of violence, and the difficulties of redemption. It has a narrative about the consequences of repressed trauma and how the past can haunt individuals throughout their lives. Lyle Mitchell Corbin Jr. is an indigenous filmmaker from the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. He is known for his distinct storytelling, often focusing on the experiences of Native American characters and exploring themes of identity, trauma, and resilience. Corbin is a writer, director, and producer, and his work is recognized for its bold, emotionally complex narratives blending personal and cultural experiences. Critics praised Wild Indian for its emotional complexity, compelling performances, and its ability to blend elements of thriller and drama in a way that felt fresh and innovative. The film was highlighted for its powerful storytelling, handling of dark themes, and the way it addresses the emotional burden carried by its characters. However, some viewers found its intense tone and bleak portrayal of trauma difficult to watch, though this part of the film's intentional focus on raw and confronting emotional experiences. In Wild Indian, the visuals and sound design are deeply engaging, often emphasizing the emotional and psychological struggles of its characters. The cinematography includes intimate close up shots of the characters, which allow you to feel their inner turmoil and vulnerability. These shots are often paired with wide, expansive views of nature, which create a sense of isolation and tension. The film also uses a subtle, haunting soundtrack that doesn't overpower the scenes but enhances the emotional atmosphere. The sound design includes environmental sounds like wind, rustling leaves, and distant bird calls, which ground the film in its natural setting. The dialogue is often sparse, with long pauses that allow silence to carry the weight, creating an eerie and contemplative mood. The use of shots, sound, and the music in Wild Indian deeply pulls the viewer into the emotional worlds of the characters. From the start, the close-ups mentioned before capture small but powerful details, such as a glance, a slight expression, or a moment of stillness. That reveals the character's pain, guilt, and fear without needing words. This visual closeness makes you experience these emotions along with them, creating a strong connection to their struggles. In contrast, the wide shots of nature emphasize the character's deep isolation. The vast, open landscapes seem to stretch endlessly, making the character appear small and distant from both the world around them and their own emotions. These wide shots help convey that the characters are not just physically alone, but also trapped by their own guilt and fear. The natural world around them, so large and indifferent, mirrors their emotional emptiness and inability to escape their past. The film's sound design adds to this feeling of isolation. The quiet, minimalist approach to sound makes every little noise stand out. Whether it's the sound of leaves rustling or the distant call of birds, like before, the tension builds even further, making the viewer feel on edge. The minimal use of music allows the emotional weight of the scenes to unfold naturally, without being forced. When music does appear, it's soft and subtle, blending into the background to enhance the mood rather than overpower it. This quiet approach, both in sound and visuals, invites the viewer to reflect more deeply on the story. It doesn't follow a traditional narrative style, Instead, it takes you on a psychological journey with the characters. This film doesn't push you to feel a certain way, but allows you to experience the characters' emotions and decisions in a personal way by focusing on the subtle details. Next, I want to look at how some of our course themes connect to the film. Survivance. The film explores the internal conflict of reconciling one's indigenous identity with the pressures to conform to mainstream society. Makwa tries to escape his past, but his trauma and heritage keep resurfacing, symbolizing the difficulty of severing ties to one's roots. Wild Indian portrays the ongoing struggle to preserve cultural identity and resist even when faced with painful memories. Ultimately, the film suggests that true survivance involves not just surviving the past, but confronting and breaking free from the cycles of violence and trauma, symbolizing the broader hope for healing and reclaiming Indigenous identity in the world that has long sought to suppress it. Colonialism. The theme of colonialism is shown through the lasting effects it has on Indigenous characters. Colonialism is portrayed as a force that causes deep harm to Native peoples, affecting their lives in ways that continue long after colonization has officially ended. The film shows how violence, displacement, and forced changes caused by colonialism has left lasting scars on its characters. For example, Makwa's feelings of guilt and confusion about his identity stem from the disruption of his community and culture due to colonial forces. His struggles are a reflection of how colonialism has deeply impacted indigenous communities, creating cycles of trauma that are hard to escape. Makwa tries to distance himself from his past and his native heritage, which represents how colonialism often pressures indigenous people to reject their culture and blend into mainstream society. The violence in this film also highlights the ways that colonialism used to force, to control, and suppress indigenous people. Through the characters' experiences, Wild Indian reveals that colonialism isn't just something of the past, but an ongoing force that shapes the lives, identities, and relationships of Native peoples in profound and painful ways. Cultural appropriation. Makwa's efforts to separate himself from his native heritage reflect how indigenous cultures have been pushed aside, or seen as less important by dominant societies. He tries to adopt a more mainstream identity, which shows the pressure indigenous people face to conform to a world that doesn't respect their culture. This internal struggle can be seen as a form of cultural appropriation, where indigenous people may feel forced to reject their own traditions in order to fit a society that often uses their culture for entertainment or convenience. Through these themes, the film highlights the ongoing tension between indigenous peoples and a world that often treats their culture as something to be taken without truly valuing it. Resistance. The film also touches on the resistance faced by Native Americans in a larger context of cultural assimilation and survival. Makwa resists fully embracing his indigenous identity, choosing instead to live a life disconnected from his heritage. This struggle between maintaining cultural ties and fitting into a predominantly white society is central to the film's exploration of identity and resistance.